People have started to call this small Icelandic town the Pompeii of the North.
In this week's programme, we find out why.
Coming up on the programme this week, we're in Iceland to meet the people unearthing the past from beneath lava and ash.
Some of them were melted because of the heat. See, the building is all like boiled.
We're fighting our way through the final leg of our journey along Canada's Northwest Passage. And we take a 60-second stopover in Sydney.
Check the bass.
Welcome to the Travel Show with me, Henry Golding, and this week I'm back in London. And it's a place I know very well, but stay tuned as I'll be going on a tour which promises to showcase this city in a whole new light. And all I need is one of these. But first,
Check it out, check it out.
As we've seen recently, Iceland is a country built on geological fault lines and is prone to volcanic activity. We sent Joanne Worley to the town of Heimaey, which suffered the full impact of nature's force in 1973 and survived. Well, just about.
It's about 2:30 in the morning. My mother is calling my name and asking me, please Helga, in a hurry, get up. There is something terrible going on the island. There is eruption. There was a big one column of fire from the earth and to the sky, and it was really terrifying because I have never seen so much fire.
On the 23rd of January 1973, a volcano that hadn't erupted for 5,000 years ripped open the island of Heimaey. Ash and pieces of volcanic rock, called tephra, burst through a 2-kilometre tear in the earth. The call went up to evacuate the island. Helga was 17 at the time and fled her house with her boyfriend.
I remember my boyfriend, he was holding his arms around me and tried to take the tephra out of my hair because we were covered, our clothes were covering with that. The fissure has not only gone up the island and behind the old volcano, it was coming in the direction to the harbor, and we can see the glowing lava on the ocean floor. At that moment we thought, this is maybe it. This is our last moments.
Incredibly, the 5,000 inhabitants managed to escape on boats and ships that had been docked in the harbour due to bad weather. There was only one death, caused by a gas explosion. All in all, the eruption lasted for 5 months.
This amazing field of rocks and boulders was once a wall of molten lava heading right for Heimaey, and you can just see through the mist how it's reached right up to people's back gardens. But there were 400 unlucky homeowners, and their houses are buried deep beneath my feet.
It was a painful time for the people who had to go and live on the mainland as refugees, but now it's hoped the impact of that night can be used to bring tourists to this tiny fishing community. Archaeologists have been uncovering what's left of the houses, giving the island the nickname Pompeii of the North. Now an entire museum has been built around the remains of one of the homes.
Now we are coming to the television room. This is the sofa.
Gerda lived in this house. She evacuated with her 3 small children. The youngest was a newborn baby.
This is your
With the-
baby's jumper.
Yes, this is asleep.
Oh, and that's still all together. And how did you feel when you saw this tiny
It's
jump?
very difficult to see. It's very difficult to see the house when they dig it up. Now we are going to the kitchen.
Parts of the house were preserved by 15 metres of volcanic ash, but you can see the impact of the intense heat. This metal spoon has melted away. It's a fascinating snapshot of Gerda's life 40 years ago. But not all the island's inhabitants were as happy to dig up the remnants of a traumatic past.
It's very difficult for some people. They relive the night they had to leave the houses and leave everything behind and just go on a fishing boat on a 5 hours trip in a not too good weather. So.
Olafur manages the excavation project and also has a personal connection to these houses.
I know from my parents who had 2 boys, 3 and 5 years old, and in a fairly new house, but they had spent a lot of time, a lot of money building, and it went under the lava. It was not a good time. They were actually, at first, they were not very happy about it, but now they are okay. And my mother said to me, it was about time, but you shouldn't have done it sooner. It was not the right moment sooner, but it's been 40 years, so it's okay now.
This picture was taken in March 1973 during the eruption.
Helga now runs a memorial cafe commemorating the eruption. But even she found it difficult to relive those experiences.
So you've been to see the new exhibition. What was that like?
The first day when it opened, and I was running in tears. It was very emotional for me, and I just decided I will come back later.
For her, part of dealing with what happened that night is inviting tourists to her house for a traditional Icelandic meal and concert, and to tell them the story of her and her boyfriend Arno's escape. Over 40 years later, they're still together. And as for Gerda, she's now come to terms with seeing her belongings for the first time in decades, and is proud that people can learn about the island's history by looking through the remains of her family's home.
My husband said, I'm going to build a house once in my life. It's going to be good and strong, no matter the cost. He was building it to be here forever, and in a way, he was right.
Joanne Worley reporting there. And if you're planning a trip to Iceland,
here's a travel show guide to things to think about before you go.
Iceland is a beautiful country, but beware. Travelers from most countries will find things like eating and drinking out very expensive. The good news is that most of the attractions in Iceland are free of charge, with some notable exceptions like the Blue Lagoon and some private museums. So try to think before you go about how you can make your money stretch further by self-catering or cheaper travel options. For most travelers to Iceland, the Northern Lights are an unmissable attraction. The spectacular natural phenomenon is best seen between late September and early April. And if you're thinking of going next year, you may be in for an especially impressive light show. In 2015, the Northern Lights are expected to be some of the most spectacular. Despite what Iceland's name implies, temperatures are often mild. While they have been known to reach as low as minus 24 degrees centigrade, it's far more typical for temperatures to range from as low as minus 4 degrees in winter to 18 degrees in summer. You might as well be walking on the sun.
Here's this week's travel update.
First up this week, there's good news for travelers who want to use their electronic devices on planes. Australia's Aviation Authority has approved the use of smartphones, tablets and e-readers as long as they're in flight mode. falling in line with similar decisions made in America and Europe last year. But not all flights will be covered by the new guidelines, so make sure you check what your airline permits before you fly. In Italy, one of Rome's major sightseeing hotspots has been kept firmly on the tourist trail after some inventive building works. The world-famous Trevi Fountain has been undergoing restoration work, but a transparent suspended walkway means visitors will still be able to see the masterpiece in all its glory. The restorations are expected to be completed by autumn 2015. And finally to Spain, where the annual Tomatina Festival saw contestants painting the town red. The festival, held annually at Buñol, had 22,000 revelers throwing 125 tons of ripe tomatoes at one another over one frenzied hour.
Still to come on the programme.
Good morning again, sir.
We'll be calling in the Canadian Coast Guard to help crack through the ice as we continue our journey along one of the world's most dangerous sea voyages.
We've seen a bear in the area. We're confident that bear doesn't pose any immediate threat, but we want to be safe.
And I'll be getting a masterclass in smartphone photography in London's East End.
Moving down, for example, and taking it from upwards.
Look at that.
Instantly artier.
So see you after the break.
Next up, we continue our journey through the Northwest Passage, a shipping route that links the North Atlantic and Arctic Oceans. It's impassable for most of the year due to its thick Arctic ice, and even when the ice melts during the summer, it's still a difficult crossing to attempt, as Karen Bowerman is finding out.
It's another typical day in the Northwest Passage, but this isn't a typical excursion. We're calling at Devon Island, a place too bleak to sustain life. Wearing wet weather gear and PFDs or life jackets, we head to the beach, but we're not the first visitors ashore.
What we're going to do is keep our PFDs on today for obvious reasons. We've seen a bear in the area. We're confident that bear doesn't pose any immediate threat, but we want to be safe.
Devon Island tells a story of struggle and survival. Back in the 20s, 3 Mounties, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, were sent to live here, to guard the passage. It was probably the most isolated job in the world. For the first few years, the men here didn't even have a radio. The only news they got of the outside world came from a government ship bringing fuel and supplies. and that only visited once a year.
For just one time, I would take the Northwest Passage.
We tend to think of the Brits, they did it a lot, arrive somewhere, plant a flag for king and country or queen and country at a time when many other nations were showing interest in the north. Canada as a new nation was right to try and settle some of these areas.
To find the hand of Franklin reaching for the Beaufort.
Even before then, charting the passage was a matter of huge national pride. As our own quest continues, we honour those who didn't make it, including the 19th century British explorer John Franklin and his crew.
So if you can raise your glasses and drink to their health and their memory, to Franklin and the Northwest Passage. And if you don't want to drink it, share it with these thirsty sailors.
Through a land so wide and savage, and make a Northwest Passage to the sea.
A few days later, it's a beautiful morning at sea. But it soon clouds over and we hit ice.
Is it that big a deal? Absolutely. If you look at the historical expeditions through this area, a lot of ships have been lost out here, and we believe due to ice.
The ice brings bears, but while the animals move freely, we'll soon be stranded. What's more, the ice is blocking the Bellot Strait, our key to completing the passage. Time to bring in the big guys, the Canadian Coast Guard.
Good morning again, sir. Wanted to cross-check with you what kind of weather...
Luckily, they happen to be close by, and they're not short of tricks, which is just as well, since we're not the only ones in a bit of a mess.
Roger that, thank you very much. I'll be standing by on 16 and 16.
20 hours later, at twilight, we see the last of the ice. From then on, it's plain sailing. And as the sun sets on 12 dramatic days at sea, we look back at an exhausting but exhilarating journey. Somehow, against the odds, we've made it through the passage.
Karen Bowerman reporting there from the Northwest Passage. That's when this week I'm in London. Each year, this city welcomes over 15 million people, and lots of them will come armed with a camera to soak up those iconic photo opportunities. Now, as most of them are already carrying smartphones, maybe they're missing a trick.
But does it really have to be that way? Here in East London, there's a tour with a difference, and I thought I'd go and try it for myself.
East London has long held the crown as the hip part of town. It's awash with street art. So what better place to take a photography class?
The idea today is really about using what we carry every day as a way of seeing what's around us and a way of slowing down and looking at the neighbourhood.
But there are no £1,000 cameras here. Oh no, we're using our smartphones.
It's a really powerful camera, and we're so used to seeing people using their phones all the time. That kind of buys you a ticket to get into small spaces full of lots of people, crowds, or take images of people doing stuff that maybe if you went in with a big camera, that might not work in the same way.
It's through these little lenses that the tour hopes to show us a new side of the city. But first, we had to learn how to get the best out of them.
The lights at the window there. What I think works really well is choosing a background and waiting for something to break into that background. You can take it from being a snapshot or like a note-taking exercise to creating a feel of a place.
A few more hints and tips later, and we hit the streets.
So we've been unleashed onto the streets of London. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to take photos of, but everybody seems to be pointing in the direction of these walls. I'm missing something. You've got some good lips there. I'm going to steal your photo.
I think I need some personal tuition, if only just to stop me stealing the shots of my fellow photographers.
One thing you can do, for example, is play around with angles, so you can try moving down, for example, and taking it from upwards. And then you get...
So you get a bit of a... Look at that. Instantly artier.
And we're not just training our sights on inanimate objects.
We're utilising one of the tips that Jess gave us and waiting for somebody to cross our path. Go.
Whilst the others continued to get snap happy, I caught up with one of the tour's founders.
That seems quite an obvious question, but why smartphones?
It's taken photography, I guess, from a point where it's not just to record memories, but it's how we communicate today, and it's how we experience a lot of places.
We need the littlest member to go over, just so I know how.
Our smartphone cameras were a great icebreaker, both when talking to the others on the tour.
You're good at this, you're like a professional.
Or even persuading the locals to pose for a photo.
Do you mind if I take a photo? 3, 2, 1.
Are you in a band? You should be.
Handsomely rugged band.
It should be said that at £45, the tour's not that cheap, but you do get expert advice throughout and a glass of wine at the end.
So are we comparing now? Is it?
And whilst I can't say I came away with much insight into the history of East London, I certainly had a lot of fun and took notice of things that would normally pass me by.
So if you're one for facts and figures and history behind things, maybe it's not really the tour for you, but if you want to capture the moment and an artiste as such, then it's perfect. And you can visit an exhibition of all of my work at London's Tate Gallery. Okay, that is a bit of a lie, but I'm sure my mum will want some of the prints. But I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this week's travel show, but join us next week for this.
Krista travels to Bulgaria to join an archaeological dig that's uncovering some of the secrets of one of the oldest cities in Europe.
It's a place where people used to make offerings to the gods, so they'd come here and they'd burn an offering to Hermes or Apollo or any of the ancient gods. Kind of pretty crazy to discover this in the middle of a modern city.
In the meantime, keep up to date with us and all of our travels by jumping onto our website or following one of our social media feeds. All of the details should be on your screen now. But for me, Henry Golding, and the rest of the Travel Show team here in London, it's goodbye.